Do you think that the Japanese don't understand they're paying a fraction of the price and you are footing the bill? Of course they do. So this, on both sides, would encourage other nations, if they want to get the new drugs, to split that difference, probably pay a little more, and us to pay a little less. Drug prices. Drug makers, President Trump signing an executive order, but then discussing it. We were live this morning. We were going through run-through, and he gave a press conference in what may be the funniest press conference I think I've ever heard. And he has a friend who no doubt was very surprised to hear the commentary.
So for the first time in many years, we'll slash the cost of prescription drugs, and we will bring fairness to America. Drug prices will come down by much more, really, if you think 59. If you think of a drug that is sometimes 10 times more expensive, it's much more than the 59%. You know, it depends on the way you want to analyze it, but in one way you could analyze it that way. But between 59 and 80, and I guess even 90%.
Yeah, we'll get to the most favored nations agreements in a second, and how this will affect you and how this should play out. But more importantly, he drove home his point by going out of his way to point out that his good friend, who, fun enough, he likes, is fat.
I mean, I'll tell you a story. A friend of mine who's a businessman, very, very, very top guy. Most of you would have heard of him. A highly neurotic, brilliant businessman, seriously overweight, and he takes the fat shot drug. And he called me up, and he said, President, he calls me, he used to call me Donald, now he calls me President, so that's nice respect. But he's a rough guy, smart guy, very successful, very rich. I wouldn't even know how we would know this, but because he's got comments. President, could I ask you a question? What? I'm in London, and I just paid for this damn fat drug I take. I said, it's not working. He said, I just paid $88. And in New York, I pay $1,300. What the hell is going on? He said, so I checked. And it's the same box, made in the same plant, by the same company. It's the identical pill that I buy in New York. And here I'm paying $88 in London. In New York, I'm paying $1,300. Now, this is a great businessman, but he's not familiar with this crazy situation that we have. But he was stunned. But it was just one of those stories. And I brought it up with the drug companies, represented by somebody who's very, very smart, good person, too. And we argued about it for about half hour. And then finally he just said, because they can't justify it, he just said, look, you got me. You got me. I can no longer they've been justifying this crap for years. They said, oh, it's research and development. Well, I said, well, research and development, other countries should pay research and development too. It's for their benefit.
And the funny thing is, I guarantee you his friend thought that was endearing.
I know. He's taking the fat pill. It's not working.
I mean, it is.
Well, yeah. Well, the thing is, the left is offended by... Who are you to be offended on that guy's behalf?
No.
Right? He wants to save money on drugs. Donald Trump took it upon himself to go, yeah, you know what, there's probably something we can do. Mm-hmm. Also, you're fat.
Try a new pill.
By the way, most men don't care, just so you know, because a lot of them are like, that's mean, man. If you call like a fat guy fat, like he'll be like, yeah, I could lose some weight. We don't rate ourselves a 10. So, to be clear about this, he's right. A lot of R&D does take place in the United States. I want to get to the order, but it's a little bit complicated here because I was raised in Canada, where healthcare is subsidized. The actual healthcare is terrible. You still have to pay for 70% of the drugs you want, but drugs are much less expensive there. Now, the drugs in a lot of these countries are less expensive because these pharmaceutical companies do all their R&D in the United States and plan to recoup their profits off of the American taxpayer, plan to recoup their profits off of you, the American consumer, and they take what they can get in these other nations because these other nations just say, hey, if it's whatever, here's a threshold for the price. If it's more than that, you can't bring it into our country. Well, at that point, it's basically non-competitive because we're not allowed to buy the drugs from these countries. So they say, okay, we'll take what we can get. And through our third-party insurance system here, they plan on charging you astronomical rates. So it's baked into their business model, and it is wrong. We don't want to lose R&D here. We don't want to lose the innovation and all the new drugs that we've developed, right? That is important. If the United States doesn't spearhead that, there will be no more new medications. There will be no cure for cancer. It's not going to happen anywhere outside the United States. But there also needs to be some shouldering of this burden from other nations. They haven't been interested in it because they too. So just as the pharmaceutical companies know this, these other nations know that they'll be the beneficiaries of these new drugs at your cost. So the new order will officially direct RFK Jr. to come up with some price-cutting goals within 30 days, be able to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies. And if the talks fail, they can enforce what's known as a most favored nations pricing policy.
Yeah.
Some of you may be familiar with this, favored nation agreements. Sometimes it also has to do with unions. So, for example, when I was on film sets, the favored nations would mean you have to pay a certain amount of people union scale, even if you didn't have that number of union members. But how it relates to international policy, specifically with drugs, it basically requires a country that's providing any kind of a trade concession to one trading partner to do it with all of them. So basically, the United States would pay the same for drugs as the lowest priced comparable country, meaning Germany doesn't get to pay, let's say, $50 for a drug that you have to pay $500 for.
Right.
It's now $50 for Americans. So to give you some examples, this is a really important one. The cancer drug, Keytruda, in the United States, it costs $191,000, this treatment. In Japan,
That's the most.
it's $44,000.
Yeah.
So we're the highest, they're the cheapest. And so if this policy goes, if it's implemented, you would now be effectively paying $44,000 as opposed to $191,000. You think Japan doesn't know that? Do you think that the Japanese don't understand they're paying a fraction of the price and you are footing the bill? Of course they do. So this, on both sides, would encourage other nations, if they want to get the new drugs, to split that difference, probably pay a little more, and us to pay a little less. This puts some leverage on the pharmaceutical companies and on foreign nations. And in that instance, I'm all for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if it works out like that, then that's a really good thing. And of course, Japan's not going to go up to like 4 times necessarily what they're paying right now, but they're going to go up quite a bit, and the United States is going to be able to come down quite a bit. So that's fantastic. The thing that you've said recently about this, where we're subsidizing the rest of the world through military expenditures and also through they're instead of doing military, they're doing healthcare.
Right.
This kind of squeezes that a little bit.
Yes, it does.
So if they're now paying, because they have kind of socialized medicine to a large degree, if they're now paying a lot more for this stuff and we're not, like that does put some pressure on them in some weird kind of ways that I wasn't thinking about when we started talking about this story until you just said that. I was like, wait a minute.
Well, think about Bernie saying, we do not have socialized healthcare like every other nation. Now these nations go, oh, wait a second. It's going to cost us 2, 3, 4 times more. They've been afforded the right to have socialized healthcare, largely because some of these states, there's a population of Rhode Island, and it's subsidized, and they know that you foot the bill. That's going to force them to tell their citizens, hey, by the way, your taxes are going up. Why? Because Americans have been paying 2, 3, 4, sometimes 8 times the amount for the drugs that come from their country that you are, and they want us all to pay a little bit.
Yeah.
So do you want cancer treatments? Do you want treatments for diabetes? Do you want new, experimental post-stroke or embolism treatments?
They won't say it like that, of course.
No,
They'll say it a lot more cunty, but
yeah, they'll blame the United States for wanting them to, split the difference. But this is why it's your job to champion this cause. Hey, yeah, I get Japan. We're not hurting you. We're not coming out and harming you. We're literally kind of like retaliatory tariffs. This policy says we get to pay the same that you do, considering that we are the country where the drugs come from.
Yes. And it's really up to the drug companies. If the drug companies don't come to an agreement with the administration, then we implement this policy, and the drug companies get to set the price. What the cheapest price in the world is. Drug companies, you're still free to do that. But
you know what it forces them to do too? It forces them for the first time to actually negotiate in faith with other governments.
Yeah.
Your government has been a never-ending supply of money for them. So basically, pharmaceutical companies go, all right, what can we charge the Americans? And then they go to other governments who put their foot down. We have socialized healthcare here. They go, all right, well, we'll take whatever you guys can give us. For the first time, it forces drug companies to go, no, sorry, Denmark. Sorry, Canada. You're going to actually have to negotiate with us here because we're not just going back to the $36 trillion in debt nation. They expect you guys to start contributing a little bit, just like NATO. And this is something that President Trump he's the first president of our lifetime. And if you go back to me in 2008, being raised in Canada, I saw it all the time. And I've been screaming this from the rooftops. These other nations benefit from the United States while chastising us. He pointed out in his press conference that Americans have been subsidizing socialist systems around the world for years while they stare down their noses at you.
But I figured it out For years, pharmaceutical and drug companies have said that research and development costs were what they are, and for no reason whatsoever. They had to be borne by America alone. Not anymore, they don't. This means American patients were effectively subsidizing socialist healthcare systems in Germany, in all parts of the European Union. They were the toughest of all. They were nasty.
So here's what this does. So he's right, by the way. 70% of pharmaceutical profits come from the United States. So if Germany, let's say we're paying here, we're paying $50,000 for a drug. And in Germany, they're paying $5,000. All right? Now that doesn't happen. And you think that that might affect Germany, liberal progressive Germany, subsidizing green energy? Well, they also purchase, by the way, fossil fuels from Russia. Do you think that Germany would get to the point of declaring internet a fundamental human right and giving it to all of their citizens for free if before that they actually had to pay a fair price for drugs that were created and developed here? No, absolutely not. This shifts the dynamics of, it takes away the moral high horse of socialists.
Yeah.
This is one thing, too. You'll hear the left. They always say, well, there really is no, the United States is not a truly capitalist system. That's true. That's true. But these other nations certainly champion and brag about their socialism and how we're the only nation that doesn't follow suit. Well, the truth is, none of these systems are actually true socialist systems. They rely on the free enterprise and the ingenuity and the industry of you, the American worker. So flip that argument around to them. Well, there really is no true capitalist system. There really is no true socialist system because you do it only because we don't. I think this is a very, very good move. It's also an important move because you have to ask yourself, the left, the Democrats have been sort of running on this issue forever.
Oh, yeah.
But this is something you can do through executive order that could potentially increase profits, but would certainly benefit the consumer. But the left didn't do this. They went right away to the healthcare exchange. They went right away to mimicking the socialized systems in these other countries that we know will collapse if we were to do so. Why didn't they take an action like this? If they talked about healthcare for Americans, healthcare, before we go to healthcare is a human right, how about lowering the costs? How about doing it without completely overhauling the system and violating
or subsidizing it?
Fundamental constitutional rights. RFK Jr. brought that up in the conference that Democrats, again, have been running on this issue for a long time. So, hey, you should be on board.
This is an extraordinary day. This is an issue that, I grew up in the Democratic Party, and every major Democratic leader for 20 years has been making this promise to the American people. This was the fulcrum of Bernie Sanders' runs for presidency, that he was going to eliminate this discrepancy between Europe and the United States. But as it turns out, none of them were doing it. It's one of these promises that politicians make to their constituents, knowing that they'll never have to do it. And the reason they'll never have to do it is because they know that Congress is controlled in so many ways by the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, and what this really does too is it forces companies to no longer play both sides of the fence. Right? That's important. It's like, hey, you don't get to charge Americans this much while you benefit from other socialized systems. This can't happen anymore. Everyone has to start playing ball. It forces other nations to become more free if they want access to the benefits of freedom provided by the United States. You can compare it right back to NATO. You know what? We're not going to do it. Start footing your own bill. Hey, do you like what you saw? I don't know how, because it's on YouTube and we have to cut all the good parts out. So you should tune in live weekdays at 11 a.m. Eastern on Rumble, where we can still speak freely and even use words like and get and
so.
Whoa. You've been here this whole time?
Yeah. Snuck in.